I'm Terry Shepard. Being a confident podcast guest is a skill that can be learned. And that's why I wrote How to Become a Dynamic Podcast Guest and Sell Stuff. It's a sweet and short primer that teaches you about the gear, the appearance, and the messaging that can grab and hold today's micro attention spans and motivate your listeners to take action. How to Become a Dynamic Podcast Guest and Sell Stuff. The digital version is just $1.99 at Amazon. Grab your copy today and sell more books tomorrow.
In Conversation with Terry Shepard, award-winning broadcaster, narrator, and author. A deep dive into the writer's craft with the artists and support systems who create the stories we love.
What happens when an ancient secret hidden inside a murdered judge's virus-infected laptop becomes the key to humanity's future? Today's guest, author Gary Fields, takes readers on a globe-spanning and time-bending journey in his debut thriller, The Book of Judges. The story follows a young lawyer, a doctoral candidate, and a tech wizard who are thrust into a dangerous 3-day race for answers after the killing of a respected judge. They decode clues buried in the computer. They find themselves hunted across Florida by a relentless killer and others desperate to claim the mysterious laptop. Gary Fields joins us in conversation. Great to have you here, Gary.
Thanks so much, Terry. Great to be on your show.
How did a technological guy who was also an attorney become an author?
Well, I've always had this love of words. So when I was young, I found this talent for rhyming. I've written poetry my whole life. In college, I did what most people did in the late 60s, early 70s, picked up guitar, started to turn those poems into songs. But eventually, the words weren't going to be enough, a few lines at a time. There were too many filling my head. I wanted to do something more with them. And an interesting thing is that in the book I ultimately wrote, The Book of Judges, a key concept is actually called the words.
And tell me about that key concept.
Okay, so I've always had this feeling that what we have in our minds when we create things, whether it's a book, whether it's a painting, whether it's a brilliant work of science, that it's not just about us. It's almost like there's something floating in the air that we pick up on. Why is it that we have an interest? Among all the interests we see, why is it one thing that attracts us more as an individual? What makes that happen? So this book, in part, explores that. And the concept of the words is a concept of maybe we're all connected in some ways we don't really think we understand.
Modern technology and ancient history is quite a combination. What made you choose that?
Okay, let's go back to the beginnings of this. So I've always loved historical fiction, but I enjoy the pacing, the suspense, and the twists of a good thriller. People like Dan Brown, and if any of your listeners have ever read The Eight by Catherine Neville, they do this really well. They write a modern-day thriller with weight by bringing in the history. So one day, about 20 years ago, my wife said something to me that I guess we all need to hear from our significant others from time to time. She said, she just finished reading one of these mixed genre books, and she looks over at me and says, "Get off your butt." Now, what she actually said was, "You could do this." And 3 days later, using my legal background, I had a kernel of an idea. I said, what if there were judges throughout history over the last few thousand years that discovered a secret that could be world-changing today? That was my start.
We're talking with Gary Fields about the Book of Judges. His website is garyfields.com. Without giving away any spoilers, give us the resumes of your 3 key protagonists.
Okay, so Joshua Sutton, who we call Josh, they tell us that we debut novelists to write what you know. So Josh has drawn a bit from myself and my 2 sons. There's a little strong-headedness there. There's some logic to replace super strong emotion. But there's a good heart and a good sense of right and wrong. His background is he's a young lawyer, just out of law school, but worked in the tech field right up to put himself through law school. So similar to my background in that regard, although his personal life and background is very different than mine. My co-protagonist, Sammy or Samantha, she's a doctoral candidate in theology and history, and she draws a bit from my wife and daughter. They're both empaths. They're both brilliant, eternal students with a ton of grit, and a piece of them is always back in Brooklyn. And my final member of my trio is my quirky tech genius, Mark. He is a combination of a lot of the lovable characters from when I was back in the tech world. So there you go.
You've had so many careers in your life. What drew you to tech?
I always wanted to be a lawyer. It was that thing about the words. I wanted to be able to argue passionately for clients, and I'm a people person. I love being able to help someone individually. So went off to college with that goal. I was told, too many lawyers, no jobs. When you have a math ability, why don't you go into tech? So I did, and I went into tech. And what I found after a few years in tech, and I wrote computer programs and systems for some Fortune 500 companies, I found I didn't get a real kick out of making some company more efficient. I wanted to be a people person. So my wife and I made this crazy decision to put ourselves through law school at night, which we did at the University of Miami. 3 grueling years later, we got out. I became a lawyer. I ended up developing a solo practice in Florida, in South Florida, and representing condominiums and HOAs, and did it for 25 years till I retired recently. And actually loved it. Loved representing clients. Loved representing clients that need it. You can imagine condos and HOAs get into a lot of difficult situations. And I was a problem solver to keep people out of trouble. So I enjoyed it a lot.
What makes a good judge?
What makes a good judge? Maybe the same thing that makes a good husband, listening. Rather than ruling from the bench and just thinking about the ruling, really hearing the parties.
How important was it to make technology feel authentic in this story? It's easy to run off the reservation on that one.
I have a good background there, so I pick up things pretty well in that area. And the funny thing is, because the first drafts of this book, as I said, started 20 years ago, the tech then, very different than the tech now. In fact, doing my research on other historical stories in the book was a lot more difficult then than it would have been now. So I had to, as I updated, and this book has been through 15 drafts, as I updated to the most recent drafts, I kept in touch with the technology to make sure that I was being accurate in the book. In fact, there are some references to AI in the book as well, and I wanted to be accurate on those.
Gary Fields is our guest. GaryFields.com is his website, and we're talking about his debut thriller, The Book of Judges. Why do you think it took such a long time to get this book done?
Something that happened to me was called life. Back then, we still had 2 kids at home. I was running this full-time solo law practice. I was coaching youth sports, and I was very involved in community activities. So took me 3 years to get that first draft out, working at night after the wife and kids were sleeping, which was exceedingly tough for me because I'm a day person. But, I had enough encouragement early on and had one editor look at it early on and realized me and this book needed a ton of work until it was going to be a truly readable novel. Realizing I didn't have the time, I put it off for about 10 years till I retired. And when I retired, I spent a couple of years just working on my writing muscle, not even going back to the book, writing scripts, taking master classes, did a few more drafts when I finally went back. Was referred by a New York Times bestselling author to a wonderful editor. I worked with her for 2 years, and finally, 15 drafts later, felt like it was ready.
How did you learn the craft?
I think trial and error. I think it was all those drafts. I think it was the master classes, just exercising writing muscles, getting a phenomenal editor that basically I felt like gave me an MFA in 2 years. It took all of that to learn the different components that went into this.
This has a complex historical structure. Was this something you outlined in advance?
Yes, I'm not an exacting outliner, but the rough, yes. I had an idea of how I was going to use these 8 historical stories in the book, how they were going to flow throughout the book, how they were going to fit into this thriller, which they do without giving out a major spoiler, but it has to do with dreams of the protagonists.
You got to tell me a little bit more about dreams without giving the whole story away. You just tickled somebody's fancy out there in the audience with that one.
Okay. So Josh, our key protagonist, has been haunted a little bit about dreams. And there's an issue in his family, a very severe issue related to that I will not give away. And he's been reluctant to follow his dreams, but he's had these strong dreams for a while. And turns out our co-protagonist, Sammy, which we discover in the book, has had similar dreams. It eerily comes together in the book, and these judges' stories from up to 2,000 years ago start to come out, where these judges are trying human rights trials under tough circumstances because the laws are often against what we consider fair today. And these justices are wrestling, trying to find justice. And Josh and Sammy ultimately connect to this, connect to a secret that comes out through this with a bunch of clues from the judge's computer. And slowly but surely, they put this whole puzzle together and realize there's a judge in New York whose life they have to save, or it could impact the world.
Novel touches on religion, human rights, destiny, the idea that humanity is interconnected. Which one of those themes was most important for you to explore?
Well, I think the overriding theme is the interconnectedness, is the fact, is that little question in our head is, how is our destiny really determined? Is it made for us? Are we a crossing guard sitting on the corner, letting the third graders come across and just to maintain our station? Or is there more to it? Is it just malleable but set? Or is there a whole different way our destinies come about? And I think the book's ultimate theme is really resting right there.
Talking about the Book of Judges with its author, Gary Fields. GaryFields.com is the website. The book is available now. It's been compared to the Da Vinci Code, which is high praise. What kind of reading experience were you hoping to create for fans of that style of thriller?
I think it's important that you do two main things, which is you've got to have pace. You want a book that moves. I've got short chapters in general in the whole thriller section of the book where you are just moving and every chapter is ending on something that makes you want to go forward. So you've got to have that. You've got to have very interesting clues. You've got to have interesting characters, but you've also got to have history that is accurately researched. And it was crucial to me that in each of these historical stories, that the law that each case is based on, the trial proceedings and the potential punishment, some of which are pretty wild compared to what we do today, that those are all accurate. So I felt like if you had that, you had the feel of the kind of book in that genre that I wanted to create.
Was there ever a point in its construction where you got stuck?
I think there are always points as writers where you get stuck, but I think on the flip side of that, there are times where I found, and I'm sure you've heard this from other writers, where as you're going along, suddenly either a point of research, a point of law, a point of religion comes in that fits your scenario and what you've been thinking about all along so well, and you didn't even know it was out there. And it adds so much to the book.
Joshua Sutton is a fascinating protagonist. Does he have a future?
Yes, I am well into the sequel of this book. This book is actually going to be part of the Words series. And yes, I'm well into book number 2.
What's your take on artificial intelligence and the popularity of AI these days?
Ooh. People are looking about what's going to happen in the next few years and scary things. They're worried about what's going to happen. I don't want to scare your listeners, but I can talk about something in the future that potentially is very scary with AI from a political standpoint. So one of my stories has to do with Henry VIII. And he tried to pass a law that allowed the government to look inside your mind, basically, to say that you have to swear an oath. You had to basically admit what your political leanings were by oath. You couldn't keep them to yourself or you could be executed. So if you look at where we are in society, there's a futurist out there. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's called Ray Kurzweil. Ray Kurzweil has prophesized that sometime maybe in the next 20 years, we'll reach a point where our consciousness can be downloaded to a machine. And he claims that will provide immortality to the human race, that our consciousness will ultimately then be able to be put into a clone or a robot or somewhere, but it won't go away. Well, let's think about that. If your consciousness is sitting on a server somewhere, and we have a future Henry VIII running the country, and they decide, I can go into that person's mind. I can find out what their political leanings are. And I can then delete the servers of the opposing party. And we have 1 million people a year, 3 million people a year in this country that die, that would then be on servers. And they could start to cut out 1 million or 2 people a year of the opposing party. So AI has some frightening possibilities.
What do you hope people will take away from their encounter with the Book of Judges?
I think 2 things primarily. First, I would hope that they're uplifted by all these characters, these judges and my protagonists, that despite the law possibly against them, the mores of their time against them, and their own personal limitations, they try to do the right thing. They try to find justice. That's number 1. Number 2 is what we discussed earlier, which is I hope after reading this book, they'll at least consider the possibility that our destinies may flow as much from our connections to each other as they do from anything else.
Is there a question that I haven't asked you that you wish that I had?
No, I think you've pointed out the website, and I greatly appreciate that. For your listeners, there's a lot on the website. If they want to find out more about the book, more about me, we even have a book club section of book club questions on there. And we do have the opportunity, if they want to, on the website, to read a free, slightly expanded version of one of the historical stories from the book.
The website is GaryFields.com. The book is The Book of Judges. It's a great read. I highly recommend it. And it is written by our special guest, its author, Gary Fields. Gary, this has been great. Thanks a lot for the conversation.
Terry, thank you so much.
In Conversation with Terry Shepard is a copyrighted presentation. All rights reserved. I'm Lisa Davis. Join Terry Shepard next time in Conversation.